Our next speaker, Melody Rose. She is with the UT Institute of Ag Extension Agent here in Greene County. She's going to discuss cover crops and the benefits, and as far as nutrient cycling, pollinators, and beneficial insects, and talk about gardening. And I know that's her expertise. And Melody, we are happy to have you with us.
All right, am I on? Okay, great. Well, I don't know whether to be excited or nervous because other than a Women in Ag meeting a couple of weeks ago, y'all are my first group of people to present to live in well over a year. So I don't know whether to dance a jig or what to do up here. So anyway, it's just great to be with y'all and speaking about one of my favorite subjects. So 20 minutes, when Mike told me that, I was like, oh my goodness, this presentation's like 2.5 hours long. But we're going to condense this down and we're going to move really fast through this. Just know that I'm not going to speak specifically to seeding density rates and things like that because there are so many mixes available, or you can mix some of these cover crops and things like that, but we are here to help you be able to figure out what kind of system you need to make you successful. So we're kind of funneling down here to this afternoon into our vegetable gardens. So you've heard a lot about pastures and forage, but we're going to kind of hone in on vegetable gardens along with maybe orchard and vineyard floor management, that kind of thing. So again, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. Whoa. I could probably just speak the entire 20 minutes just on this one slide because this pretty well sums it up. And you've heard a lot of these things already today, but they bear repeating yet again because, I myself, growing up on a farm, my papa was always sowing these cover crops after the vegetable garden every year. Grew up on a burley tobacco farm. We sowed that down every year, but I didn't really understand what the mechanism in place for that was until I got into college. And of course, my background is agronomy. Some of you know me, remember from years ago in burley tobacco, but I kind of had to make the shift when we saw the handwriting on the wall. So that's a little bit I should throw out here too, since we've had Katie from Georgia and Justin from Florida. I got to throw in here, I'm a North Carolina native, y'all. So I landed here 20 years ago. I just had to throw that in. But anyway, I knew that covering the ground was important. And it was essential to maintain soil health, but I really couldn't put all those components together till I was in college. And now as I've utilized some of these systems, it is just very, very crucial to never leave any kind of ground uncovered. And this is going to go for you as well if you're growing in raised beds or in containers. Always have something covered up. And of course, here we are at the 1st of April, so we're getting ready to start in those veggie gardens, right? So typically we don't think about cover crops this time of year. But we're going to speak to some of those that you can actually be utilizing, even in your in-ground systems that are going to serve a purpose to get you through the summer months. And that's kind of what I'm going to focus on today. But let me run through this slide really quick. So as far as cover crops, and again, you've heard some of these things mentioned, they're going to serve the purpose for enhancing our soil structure. So we all know we're not going to be successful growing anything in the soil unless we have good soil health, right? You've heard that mentioned numerous times today. So you can see there improved infiltration. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. Improved aeration. All of that's going to be critical to meet the plant's needs and to sustain itself through that cycle of that plant's life. We also need to increase soil organic matter. And you heard us talk about, Jeremiah was talking about the physical and chemistry properties there a few minutes ago in regard to pH. But there's going to be certain things within the fruit and vegetable world that we need to focus maybe a little bit more on organic matter. And some of these soil tests are going to be able to tell you that. You're going to have to increase that soil organic matter in some of these crops. And I'll use blueberries. You heard Justin mention the blueberries that we have in plots out at the research center. So we're actually evaluating some cover crops with fruit crops. That's something that we feel like we need to look at. More specifically, maybe some root crops. Are we going to be able to drive that sulfur that we're applying to that ground a little bit deeper into the soil for those plants to be able to uptake a little bit better? So just things like that. There's a lot of different mechanisms that we can use with that. But blueberries are going to be a crop that require a high amount of soil organic matter. Vegetable gardens are going to be right up there with it too. And y'all probably all know this because you've probably been growing vegetable gardens, but if we go out and we plant in the bare red clay that East Tennessee is known for, we're not going to be real successful, are we? But if we go back to basic chemistry, we know that that clay soil carries a negative charge, right? So that's where the cation exchange capacity comes in. And all that nutrition, whether it be synthetic fertilizer or organic fertilizer, we need that clay particle to attach to in order for the plants to be able to utilize that nutrition, right? So that's where organic matter can also come in to play in that. You can see there increased nutrient cycling. Environmental quality, no brainer there. Anytime we have the ground covered, the soil is covered, then basically we're reducing erosion, right? If you're in the south end of the county, we know how the winds blow down there, so what are we doing all the time? Jeremiah, y'all know what I'm talking about. You're just blowing that soil, you know, so we don't want to do that. If we've got something green and growing on there, then it's going to keep that soil stable. And then this one here, we don't always mention this one, but improving pest management. Anytime that we have a cover, and especially now too, moving into summer, as long as we've got something green and growing, we're reducing weed pressure, right? But then also, if we plant some of these cover crops in the late fall, into the winter months, some of these cover crops are going to have an allelopathic effect, which means they're actually going to suppress weed seed germination, which is a big plus. That's another reason I'm not going to go into the specifics of all these because I'm not going to have time, but really understand some of these cover crops because they're going to serve more than just one benefit, covering the ground. You're going to have a lot of different options to choose from. If we get into a situation where we have soil fungi, especially you know, some of the soil organisms for tomatoes, early blights, sclerotinia, having a cover crop in place can actually help us suppress some of those pathogens. If we are incorporating some kind of cover crop, be it living or any kind of mulch in the summertime, we're reducing that splash effect. So when it rains or if we're watering, we're not splashing any of those potential disease pathogens up on our fruit, right? So that's going to reduce our disease pressure. Also nematode suppression. That's not as big an issue here, I don't think, in Northeast Tennessee. I've seen very little with that. But we also have cover crops that can help with that issue. Any of the brassicas, and you're starting to see the mustard blooming right now. So some of our research trials have shown that that's going to help suppress some of those nematode populations. I think it was Jeremiah or maybe David that was, it was David that was talking about legumes a little bit earlier, so I'm not going to go into a lot of that in great detail. But basically, when we look at some of these cover crop systems, we've got legumes as an option. And what that is doing is helping replenish that nutrient cycle. It's just an ongoing process. So if you're growing a vegetable garden, you're growing a lot of sweet corn. What is sweet corn? It's a grass. It's a heavy utilizer of nitrogen, right? So we might not necessarily want to come back in with 100% green biomass. We might want to actually have a legume as a cover crop because we're going to take that nitrogen from the air and put it back into the soil. Soil temperature, we've talked a lot about that. Already just using the sunshine as that food source, making sure that we're maintaining consistency with soil temperature, also with water fluctuations. So if you have these living cover crops on or growing actively in your vegetable garden, you're helping with these issues. So we want to be able to maintain those consistent soil and water temperatures. Infiltration, you've heard that mentioned a couple of times today, but basically anytime it rains or anytime you're watering your garden, what you're doing is that's actually leaching into that soil at a much slower rate, or what we call substrate. If you're doing this in your raised beds, you're getting that inflow. It's actually being able to utilize and uptake those nutrients more efficiently. And this is just a picture to kind of show what some of that organic matter looks like. Again, we can completely transform a red clay soil into a soil that will actually grow successful crops. I knew this from personal experience. When I bought my house 20 years ago, it was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? Red clay. I mean, you couldn't even hardly take a shovel and dig it in. It was just like compacted and hard. But within a couple of years of incorporating some of these cover crop practices and adding, increasing my organic matter, I was able to create a pretty successful vegetable garden. You can just kind of see there, that's kind of what we're going for. We want to have that dark, rich soil. You've heard about the microbes today. We want to encourage that biodiversity. We want to really increase that below the soil line, but we also want to do that above the soil line as well. I'll get to that in just a few minutes. But we want to see live critters, even spiders. Anybody that's afraid of spiders, those are good things to have. I heard a laugh up here. Any of those are going to be really great to have because we know that we have a healthy soil, and especially when we turn those cover crops under, then they're going to be feeding on that, breaking it down. It's all part of that nutrient cycling. It's just another schematic there to show that. This is kind of what I was talking about as we move into summer months. So some of you might actually have some cold crops out in the veggie garden now. Broccoli, cauliflower, cabbages, and things like that. Instead of just planting that bare, include some type of cover crop. Or as we move through, like I say, into the summer, in between your tomato rows, in between your cucumbers, incorporate some of these systems. This one here that you're seeing is actually a buckwheat. So we'll technically call that a broadleaf cover crop. But you can tell there just from it flowering that it's also going to serve as a pollinator, right? So you've heard that mentioned too a couple times. Our pollinator populations have been kind of in danger for the last few years. You've heard that preached on probably several times. But remember, our pollinators are not just bees. There are different types of bees, so even bumblebees. It takes different kinds of pollinators to pollinate specific crops. So even ants, different kinds of bees, even beetles can serve as pollinators. So typically what we're going to call those two kind of synonymously are our beneficial insects. So anytime that we get those benefit or have a cover crop like this, then we're going to increase the habitat for those beneficial organisms. So the other thing that they're going to do as we get the bad bugs moving into the garden in the summertime, those good beneficial insects are actually going to eat the bad guys, right? So it takes a little time. You're not going to achieve that in 1 year, but over time, you're going to be able to create this biodynamic ecosystem. Transpiration, this is going to be another issue. When you've got that cover crop system in place, then you're able, again, it's all part of that nutrient cycling. We're taking the sun, basically turning that into energy in the plants, and you'll notice there that you see drought listed. Well, if you are incorporating these living cover crops or green manures in the summer garden, then if we get into a dry season, which we usually do here in Northeast Tennessee, that's going to help moderate those soil temperatures again. So that's why it's really critical to go ahead and maybe implement some of these. This is what we never want to see. Nothing, I think somebody mentioned the construction site earlier. We want to have something green and growing on these fields all the time. Not to say anything bad about Roundup, but I put this up here just to say that many personal philosophies now, they don't want to be utilizing some of these inputs. They want to get away from synthetic fertilizer. They want to get away from some of these herbicides. 2,4-D, Roundup being the biggies. So if we're incorporating cover crops, not just through the summer months, but also all year long, if we're incorporating those, then we're going to reduce the potential use of these as well as cost to our pocket. That's the bottom line. This is what I was talking about a few minutes ago. I got ahead of myself there. But you can kind of see some of the different crops here mixed in, the clovers and the mustard. But this is going to serve as that habitat for some of those beneficials. And remember that if we're not incorporating some of these foliage material, some of these cover crops, and we're not creating that environment for these beneficials to come in, then that's also going to mean that we're going to have to spray more for insects, right, that come in to feast on our veggie gardens. So if we're incorporating some of these again, then we're going to be able to reduce some of those insect populations of the bad bugs. These are the guys that we want to have in there. Like I said a few minutes ago, we have vineyard operators, orchard guys that are going to this system, utilizing cover crops as their floor. In California and Napa, it's beautiful this time of year because the mustard's in full bloom. So you don't really get to see the vines growing. They're just starting to leaf out. But you can see the cover systems that are in place, and it works very well. It allows them to be able to cut down on their chemical usage. Also for mowing, lots of good benefits for that. And again, we talked about some pathogen suppression a little bit earlier. So again, anytime some of these issues get in the soil, is that jumping ahead or did I do that?
I'm watching it.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, when we're incorporating these cover crops, then of course we can reduce the pathogen load. And specifically, again, mustard or any of the brassicas are going to serve to be really good in pathogen suppression. So basically, what cover crops can do, how they can benefit you, is that they can cut fertilizer cost because we're actually using the energy from the sun and we're putting that into the cover crop. And kind of like Katie was saying just a few minutes ago with the cows, we're basically turning that into vegetables for our consumption. They reduce the need for herbicides. They're going to improve our crop yields because they're overall enhancing that soil health. We're increasing our soil tilth. This is something that we just don't do one time though, y'all. It's got to be an ongoing process. They're going to help us prevent soil erosion and conserve those soil moisture and temperatures, protect water quality, and then safeguard personal health. Again, the benefits, this is kind of where we're at right now, which I had brought a bag of goodies, but I left them back there in the bag, but you can kind of see the picture here. You can see that massive root system, right? So if we have a compacted area in our garden, or maybe if we want to expand production somewhere in our garden, or if you bought a place, you don't really know what that soil is going to look like. But if you go ahead and you start utilizing some of these cover crops, you're going to start building that soil health. And you can see when we turn that under, how that's going to feed all those microbes in the soil. Again, it's just this huge cycle of life that we have going all the time. Some people always ask how we incorporate these. How much time do I have, Mike? I'm good. Okay. You made me nervous. You started walking up here. Okay. But asking how we incorporate these, because we know that there's some folks that don't want to be turning this under or utilizing the no-dig approach, and that's fine, but coming from my background, just to kind of tell you how I do that. In a vegetable garden setting, of course, you can mow that off if it gets too high. Hopefully, most of those cover crops have already been turned under, at least once this year. But if it gets too high, gets to the point of almost being rank, mow that off, and then it enables you to incorporate that a little bit better later. You can see here going through with the tiller. That's probably a gardener's best friend when you're including cover crops. Personally, I have a tiller that's front tine and rear tine. So if I want to just barely disturb the soil surface, I can go through there. And even at this stage, I can just put it in front tines and just cut that root system, just scratch the soil surface. And I'm still going to get breakdown, and that's still going to be turned back in to the soil. Or you can put it in rear tine. You can set the shaft, go a little bit deeper, especially if we get some of those soil pathogens I was talking about. You're going to have to plow deep. You're going to have to kind of bury that inoculant. You're going to have to invest in a crop rotation plan because you're not going to be able to plant certain crops in there for 5 to 7 years. If you do have a small setting or you're in raised beds, you can still incorporate cover crops. So don't let that scare you off. I did have a grower last year that about got upset with me because they'd put ryegrass in a raised bed and then tried to fork it under, and it was a little difficult to do, but a couple of weeks later they were okay with everything because it really had improved their soil structure. So again, if you're in one of those settings, make sure you know how that cover crop is going to grow and produce, so you'll know how to turn that under to be less work on you. Yep, I got ahead of myself again. Some folks on a larger scale are using crimping machines, so that's another way to do that. Some growers will even use burned down herbicide to go in with no-till or strip till. Just a couple more options there if you're not turning it under. Again, that's just going to depend on personal preference and your philosophy. I'm not going to go into all these systems, and I don't know if you can see this really well, but hopefully you'll be able to get a copy of a couple of these slides. But this will just kind of help you determine which one of these cover crops are going to be best suited for your system. And it's not going to be the same, again, every year. It's going to depend on the current situation. You might be wanting to, again, prevent weed seed from germinating, so ryegrass would be a good one to use there. You may be wanting to put fertility back in the soil, so you'd want to use a legume. And you can kind of see from this schematic many different types of cover crops that are going to be available. Just to kind of mention, grass, anything like the oats, the wheat, the rye, that's going to produce a large amount of biomass when you turn that under. It's going to really help alleviate compaction issues. Plus, it's going to provide a great food source for those microbes when you turn that under. Then, of course, you have the legumes like the vetch and the clover. So as we start moving into summer gardens, clover is an excellent cover to plant in your rows in the garden. You can trample that down. It's not going to hurt it. It's not going to matter. And you've got something green growing in those rows. Then the broadleafs, buckwheat, it's going to serve as an excellent pollinator. It's also going to give you cover through the summer months. It grows really fast, so it's going to be up and growing within a couple of months. And then we have the root crops, and these are the stinky ones. But radish, we use tillage radishes out at the research center, so they do winter kill. So that's when you're going to get that prolific odor when they do die back. But if you've got some major compaction issues, those roots are going to go really, really deep and help break up some of that. Plus, they're also going to mine for some of those secondary nutrients besides N, P, and K, and they're going to bring those up better usable for your crops in the garden to be able to use. Yeah, so I think I'm getting close to time here. But again, just to say, you can mix these. So you don't have to just use wheat. You don't have to just use clover. You can use a mix of these. So one that's pretty common here in East Tennessee is rye and wheat, or wheat and clover, or the rye and clover. A lot of people stray from the vetch because it's a vining crop. You're really starting to see that one come on right now. But it's going to grow pretty fast now, pretty rapidly. It's going to put out the flower. But if you're not turning that under, then it's going to take over the universe. So again, know what those cover crops are and how they act. And last thing, and then I'm going to close it out, there's a fine line as far as when we turn these under, because with any cover crop, maximum benefit is going to be achieved when that cover crop flowers. But if that flower goes to seed, you've lost all that energy. Sometimes, especially in our grasses, because they do grow so fast this time of year, Mother Nature prevents us from getting in there and maybe turning those under. We don't always get to let those flower. And especially if you're going to grow winter or spring, what are they? The cold crops that I was talking about earlier, onion sets, lettuce, and things like that, it's going to be hard to let them get to that flowering stage before turning them. But if you're trying to build an area, especially for long-term fruit crops, or a farmer's market garden or whatever, then always kind of remember that. You're in between the flower and going to seed stage for maximum benefit. So with that, don't hesitate to reach out. We can help you with cover crop systems in your garden. Thanks again, and I'll be here for a little while. So.
Good job, Melody. Appreciate you speaking to us today.